Welcome to AFibulous Life, Unlimited Conversation, the podcast where we explore what it really means to live, adapt, and thrive with atrial fibrillation. Hosted by Jim Kaveney, this is a space for real stories, expert insights, and honest conversations about heart health, resilience, and life beyond diagnosis, because AFib doesn't define you. And with the right support, your life can still be unlimited.
Well, good afternoon and welcome back to AFibulous Life, Unlimited Conversation. I'm your host, Jim Kaveney, back for another wonderful episode. And today what we want to do is, when we talk about the AFib diagnosis, somebody probably handed you a pamphlet once you got that diagnosis, maybe gave you a medication, but no one sat down with you and asked the question, what do you need to do to actually change your life? So today's guest builds those systems at scale for some of the biggest health organizations in the country. And so I'm so excited to introduce my friend, Rachel Charbonneau. And Rachel, let's talk a little bit about your credentials, because I think, when we first met, I was just floored with what you've been doing in this space. And I told you back then when we first met, we have to find a way to work together. And so when we look at what you've done historically, right? So you are a national board certified health and wellness coach. Right? So you've done that. You're also the Senior Program Development Manager, Health Science at the AHA, which is the American Heart Association for Health Technology and Innovation. You've got 10 years of experience as well designing human-centered behavior change programs for chronic conditions, AFib being one of those. So we'll talk about AFib, obviously, but everything else. And then also the latest wrinkle that you've got going on is you're an author on Substack for health, wellness, and coaching. Is that pretty much a good summary of you?
Yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. My pleasure, and so grateful to have you in my life as well as a part of this. And I'm so excited for my guests to hear more about what you're doing and how you're impacting patients' lives. And so, as in the essence of time, as we're getting forward here, let's dive into a little bit about kind of the coaching side of things for you, because when coaches, they work on a one-on-one scale for the most part, right? But you yourself, right, you work at a different scale because you design those programs that shape how coaches work. So what was the moment that made you want to work at that systems level, even though you still do work on the individual level as well? So can you talk a little bit about that difference between your individual coaching as well as the scale in which you work on for others?
Yeah, definitely. So to do so, I think it's helpful to back up a little bit in my career. So my very first career was in design, graphic design, visual design. And in that, I learned the design thinking process as well. Then I decided, and I only worked with healthcare, and health tech companies. I decided I wanted to work with people a little bit more directly. I always had a really strong interest in health and wellness for various reasons, and so I became a health coach and was health coaching privately for about a year and a half, as well as teaching yoga. I went full in.
Love it. I love it.
Wellness. And then I realized that I could actually combine my two skill sets. They seemed very separate in my mind for a long time, and then I realized actually they work really well together. So I started working with a company called Headspace Health. This is back in 2019. So in 2019, Headspace Health was not the Headspace Health that we know today. It was an app. So I was part of an innovation group inside Headspace that built an app called Headspace Health. We were a green dot instead of an orange dot. And that was the first time I realized, I could actually have larger impact than just designing these one-on-one, or than just coaching one-on-one. And so the big difference being you can reach more people. And in that role specifically, I was joint, both delivering the coaching while also developing the evidence-based coaching leg of that program. So that program had three legs: a meditation arm, a programmatic arm, self-paced, that was based in acceptance and commitment theory, which I'm sure I'll talk about at some point in more depth in this podcast.
That'd be great.
And then there's the evidence-based coaching delivery arm. And so that was a really interesting experience for me because I didn't know how to design a coaching at scale, because there's only so much time that a coach, or not even just a coach, but a frontline worker can give a patient. So, and this is before generative AI really took off, keep in mind. And so there's even more potential now. But at that time, we had one-on-one sessions, and then we were able to have chat sessions in between. And so with that, we were able to scale. I think before that program ended, because once the pandemic hit, it shut down, which was really unfortunate. However, I think at that point we had about 100 patients that we were talking with at a time. There are some other companies out there like Noom that say that they talk to, it's like 1 to 400 people, which at a certain point it gets to be, I think, not even considered coaching. That's a whole other conversation, but I think there's more of a sweet spot. So yeah, and then I went on to do so at Walgreens Health, which was another innovation group inside Walgreens. And then now with American Heart Association, I'm more in it's more consulting with other companies that are within our network and helping to develop some of the behavior change scripts.
Okay, awesome. And I appreciate that background. And I do want to qualify too, right? You are here representing yourself, not here representing American Heart Association, even though it's a little bit of an overlap, but we just want to make that very clear. You're here on your purview, not the American Heart Association's purview. So just make sure that's clear.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. So that is a great background. So I guess then coming back to, so it's basically in summation of all of that part of your experience is when you said, oh my gosh, I can have this greater impact. I can have a kind of a larger butterfly effect with the world by doing this on a larger scale. So that is a great mission. And yeah, I think we all strive to have a larger impact. Like I worked with one behavioral company that said, we are driving to have an impact on 1 billion people. I'm like, wow, okay, that's a lot. And so it's a huge goal, but you do it one at a time and then you get that butterfly effect. So I appreciate what your approach is there in doing that. Anything else that you want to add to that context?
Yeah, it cut out for a moment, but we're back on my end. So I think I heard, I think I got the gist of what you were just saying in your question. I think the only thing to add to that is one-on-one can have such an amazing impact as well. So for any coach or person listening, that still has amazing impact. And with doing so at scale, not just for the individual coach, but when you have, what's the saying? If you go alone, you can go fast, but if you go, work together, you can go very far. When you have a team of people creating a program, I mean, as you know very well with the work that you're doing right now, when you have a team of people that can create a program and go out and sell it and start to implement it, the impact is just much wider and much greater, and that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I want to highlight too, because I think you brought up a really important point, right? Working at scale is amazing because that's where you have the greatest impact. But it is the intimacy of that relationship, the one-on-one coaching, right? So as you build that, and so when we talk about scale, it's actually empowering other people to be able to have those individual conversations with their patients, their clients, however they want to refer to them. So I think that's so important because somebody once said to me, they're like, well, if you work in a vacuum, nobody hears you. But if you work as a team, now all of a sudden your voice becomes a scream. And people now all of a sudden are starting to hear, and the echo is reverberating throughout. I think you and I were talking about this prior to starting the podcast, was like there's a reverberation of lifestyle medicine and coaching and how important it is to healthcare. And the United States is starting to adopt that in a big way. And I'm excited to be a part of that and have that conversation with you today.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it too. It's a good time to be in this space.
Yeah. And so kind of shifting a little bit to around, the science of behavior change, which you touched upon, and maybe we'll get into this a little bit more intimately too, is when you think of behavior change in the context of somebody managing AFib, right? What is in your mind, what does that actually mean day to day for them? And if AFib patient or any general patient, like what does that mean for them when they think about behavior change?
Yeah, it's a good question. So when thinking about behavior change and life, it's not just life. I guess it kind of is all lifestyle behavior change, because behavior change could even be medication adherence. I mean, that right there is a lifestyle change for somebody to go from being maybe not perfectly healthy, but healthy enough where they're not on medication to then taking medication. That's a lifestyle change. That's a behavior change. And think about, I mean, sometimes even just going to pick up medication is a big hurdle for whatever reason. So when thinking about behavior change for, it's not just AFib patients, it's for patients in general. And everybody experiences behavior change at some point in their life, right?
Yeah.
It's really just thinking about, and I'll probably end up sounding like a broken record at some point during this, but I encourage people to think back to what their why is. So usually when starting to work with patients or clients, I like to, even if somebody is very ready to make a change, I like to take a step back and start with a visualization. What's that bigger picture that you're looking to, your bigger what, like what's the what, right? And then behind that is the why, which is your values. So when making a behavior change or making any sort of subtle shift in your life, even picking up medication, rather than just thinking about like what's right in front of me, or everything that comes up in your head when trying to make any sort of behavior change, coming back to your reason why, your values, can be extremely important. So and I don't, for fear of going off and rambling too much on it, I personally like to use, there's a framework called acceptance and commitment theory. It was originally a therapeutic approach, and it's been translated as a coaching approach. I personally like to use that as a framework. There's 6 processes. I won't get into all of them right now, but one of the big ones is that values, which is really that
Right.
why. And the purpose behind ACT is to increase somebody's psychological flexibility. So the opposite of psychological flexibility is that psychological inflexibility. So when thinking about behavior change, coming back to your original question, behavior change can be hard because we get stuck in our ways, or we get stuck in our thought patterns, or we get stuck almost so comfortable being in our emotions. So starting to increase that psychological flexibility, starting with defining what's your why, can be really helpful when starting to make a behavior change. So I come at it from more of the mental side.
Love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's so important because, as we were talking as well as, physicians across the country, if it was that simple, right? Because everybody offers it up. Like there isn't a medical society in the world that doesn't say lifestyle modification should be a part of their healthcare plan. And everybody says it, but nobody follows through with it, right? Because they don't know how to. Both the practitioners don't know how to prescribe it or get it going for them, but from the patient or the clients or the members, however you refer to them, they themselves, they need a system, right? And so just saying, hey, I have a goal of doing X is not enough, right? They need to have that system. But I think what's important, what you said, was they have to have the why. Like, what is the purpose for me to do this? Like, why do I want to lose weight? Why do I want to go out for a walk? Why do I want to eat better? Well, if it's in, and I know you're coming on a personal thing, but well, I want to see my daughter get married. I want to see grandkids. I want to do this. I want to do that, right? That becomes your purpose. Now that's what your drive is. It's not about saying, hey, I want to lose weight because I want to look good in my pair of jeans, right? No, that's not going to get you very
Right.
far. But if there's something more meaningful, and I think that's great. And I think you were touching upon it too, because I think regardless of whether or not it's, mental health, hypertension, IBS, or just general weight loss, right? There is that common thread, is what you're saying, is find that purpose, find that why, and that's what will, regardless if it's AFib or any of those other diagnoses, that's what's going to drive them to want to make those changes.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And to your point, coaches, of course, I'm a little biased. I really enjoy the coaching process, and I've seen the magic that it can do on a one-on-one level and on a scalable level. And the more medical professional is very used to giving those directives, and we know the directives. I'm sure over time, as science changes, directives will change. But for the most part, directives are, we know what to do as humans, and whether we know it intuitively or we are being told by a medical professional, we know what we need to do as humans, as a patient, to make that change. It's a matter of, well, how do you do it? And that's where the behavior change support comes in. And then again, going back to what's your why? I think that's the most, if I only have time to have one conversation with somebody, if I can only have a 10-minute conversation with somebody, that's where I would start. I wouldn't even talk about the exercise and how to manage your stress and how to eat well. I would start with, what's your why?
Right. No, that's so important too, because what we have found in our history, and my partners at Nudge Health, is approaching the behavior side of things first is going to help them to make the decisions to do the physical aspects of it, and it's the whole person care, right, which we generally know provides the greater results. So kind of diving into this a little bit further, right? When you look at, because you're designing the programs and training the coaches, do you see, and you touched upon a little bit of this, but do you see from, I'll just say the AFib patient, but just in general, the patients that you work with, do you see them saying anything consistently across the board that they say they're missing because it's something that the clinical system isn't giving them? Is there any like commonality to what they're saying?
Yeah. I would say a commonality that I do see is after having a session or a few sessions is, this is what's been missing. This is what's been missing. I haven't ever really thought of it, really taken the time to sit back and think about what's the larger picture that I'm working towards. There's not every program, but a lot of programs out there, when adding coaching in or adding that behavior change component in, they automatically go to goal setting or nudges, reminders. And not to say that that's not important. Both are important and have their place. And taking the time to sit back and have that conversation of, like, what does it look like to implement something into the life that you're living, because everybody has different obstacles to navigate. Some are similar, but most are pretty different. Talking to somebody who works a night shift and is raising 3 kids on their own is going to be a very different conversation than with somebody that has the help and has more of the financial security.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, 100%. And one of the things too I want to dive in a little bit is because, when we talk about what you do and, the difference between compliance and genuine change for people, when you look at what you do from the design perspective, like, how do you design for genuine change and not just compliance?
Yeah.
Did I lose you? Did I lose you there? Do we have a...
It's interesting because I didn't know this going into making that career change, but coaching and design and human-centered design are so intertwined and so alike. So when thinking about designing for a larger system, I like to use that human-centered design process, which is really closely related to that design thinking process. Sometimes you hear them used interchangeably. And the first step in a human-centered design process is to go talk to the patient, and to not just the patient, but the system, to go talk to the who would ultimately be the end user. And the end user is sometimes just the patient, but sometimes it's the physician too, or the care navigator, or the nurse practitioner, whomever, especially if there's technology involved, which increasingly there is. That I think I know in designing at scale, talking to the person that would be using the application, and sometimes it's the caretaker too, I should add, is extremely important, because otherwise making decisions and building from a vacuum, how do you might spend all this money and then realize that, it doesn't actually make sense in the way that this patient population lives or works.
Yep. Yeah, no, exactly. One of the things I wanted to dive into a little bit too with you is the whole concept of what I shared with you before, is that center of excellence concept, right? From the idea that every AFib patient, or any patient for that matter, can build their own personal center of excellence for managing the conditions that they are dealing with. And we touched a little bit upon this in some ways too, but if someone listening right now is 6 months post-diagnosis, post-AFib diagnosis, feeling stuck, and what's one thing that you would tell them about behavior change that might make them shift their perspective on this, because they're stuck in a rut and they don't know how to get out, and they've tried a couple of different coaching programs, but is there anything in particular that you would like to say to them about something that would shift them out of that rut?
Yeah. So, and there's so many different methods you can try with behavior change, and I'd say two things. One, it's very personal to them. So if they're following an exact protocol that somebody else has given them or has shown them or paved the way for, that's great. And it might not be working for them because their life is different. Their resources are different.
Right.
Their own determinants of health are different. So it's personal, and because of that, keeping that experimental mindset can be extremely important. And so what I mean by that experimental mindset is trying something, and if it doesn't work, not thinking of it as a failure, but thinking of it as getting curious about, okay, why didn't it work for me? Why does it work so well for everybody else and not for me? Isn't a good trap to get into. Just looking at it with curiosity. What's not working about it? What wasn't helpful? And what would be helpful moving forward? So that's a big one. And then the second thing, again, going back to the values conversation, especially when working with a population that does have that's more of a chronic condition, to go from, you're talking about 6 months after diagnosis, to go from a life that you likely were leading in a different way to this new version of you, coming back to, it can be really helpful to, especially when you get in that comparison trap of like, oh, I used to be able to run a marathon and now I can't even walk a mile. That's a really big change. So coming back to defining your values, but then getting clear on not just what the values are, but then how you can connect to that, like where you're feeling connected, what values you're feeling connected to, and then what are you feeling disconnected from, and how can you maybe start to, again, getting curious, how can you maybe connect to them in maybe a bit of a creative way? Because maybe the true value of yours is not the goal of running the marathon. It's just the value of being able to be a leader for your, maybe your value is leadership, and to be able to lead by example for your kids, to be to be taking care of your health so that they could be, leading by example. So then starting to get curious, how can you start to connect to that value of leadership in a different way? And it's, maybe it still feels a little sad, and there's a little bit of grief that comes up because you're grieving that person that used to be able to run the marathons. And that's normal, and that's going to come up. But again, if you know that the reason, the why behind it is that leadership, then you can start to connect to it in hopefully a little bit of a different creative way for this next era of your life.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that word.
Instead of one,
yeah, no,
I think those are two really important ones.
they are. And the concept that you brought up, obviously, about curiosity is so important, right? Because if you, and I've got a friend of mine who's struggling, right? He's my age, a little over 50. And he said to me the other day, he's like, I've been spending lots and lots of money doing programs in which I'm watching everybody else do the programs with me, lose weight and get in better shape, and nothing's changing on my end, right? So he's like, I'm investing in watching people do better. And so the whole concept that the curiosity is so important. It's like, well, okay, let's step back, review things. Like, you're not a failure. I mean, clearly maybe there's something else underlying that's holding you back. It's nothing that you're not trying. So not a failure. It's just that you haven't figured out what the solution is just yet. So I think that's so important. And in particular, along that whole concept of failure, right? I want to tap into a little bit about, what's the role of self-compassion, right, in this? Because AFib patients and AFib patients in general, I'm speaking from me being an N of one, we can be hard on ourselves, right? And where does that compassion, that self-compassion, come into play, and in helping to sustain behavioral change, right? And what do you talk a little bit about that with your clients too?
Yeah. So joy is much more like coming at change with joy and understanding and self-compassion is much more movable than coming at it with more of that judgmental mentality. So when I talk with clients and with patients, it's much less about me telling them this, and much more about how I come to the session. Like if they come into the session and they didn't meet a goal, or they didn't do what they set out to do for the week or for the month, coming in and giving that compassion, again, it's leading by example. I know I just used that as a value in the last example, but leading by example, I think, is really important, and holding that non-judgmental space is very important, because that starts to, I see it happening over time, then people start to give themselves a little bit of slack. And giving that slack and that self-compassion can be really helpful to come into that curious state of mind. So when you're sitting there, shame was the word that I was looking for before.
Yes.
When you're sitting there shaming yourself or looking at it with shame, shame is a lot less movable than coming at it with that self-compassion or that joy. And again, providing a non-judgmental space can be really helpful for that. And not to say that every medical professional gives judgment.
Right.
And there is something to be said about, I've heard it, and I know I've seen it in myself. I'm sure you have as well, as a human who has had to go through the healthcare system. Sometimes I just get nervous to go into the doctor if I didn't, do something. I didn't pick up my medication and start taking it and try it out. And so, not to say that every medical professional gives shame, but it almost feels like a parent is telling you, oh, you didn't do it?
Right.
And shaming you over it. And with that, it almost takes longer to then take the next step. So when you come at it with more of that self-compassion, it can be really helpful. The one thing you do want to be cautious of is to avoid getting in that trap of just always having an excuse and not taking ownership ever.
So
for
important.
yourself and your own actions. So it is that gentle balance, but for the most part, staying with that more. Like one thing I like to do is word thing as helpful versus unhelpful, instead of saying like, oh, that failed, or it didn't work, or I was wrong. That can be really helpful too. That just even that bringing that gentle language in for yourself, to move forward.
Yeah, the self-talk is so important. Absolutely so important, because it starts to set the framework around negativity too, right? And then you got to battle that and get through that, which is a whole nother subject area we can dive into too. But I think what's important we've talked about so far too is, and what you're doing and what you're building is, and there's a phraseology that I sometimes when I'm going into the pantry and I'm looking at those chocolate chips and I'm like, all right, I'm going to dive into those, right? And then I say I say to myself, I go, discipline equals freedom, right? And I want to talk a little bit about that, because the structure that you help to build for these coaches and ultimately for these patients, right, is really where the freedom and the recovery comes from, is having that structure. Because I think some people think, well, wait a minute, if I'm more if I'm more restricted, how does that make me more free, right, and not less, right? And so I think that's one of the things. So as we look at, the whole concept is like, by doing the right things, keeping the structure, the format every single day, and doing it consistently, rather than, hey, I'm gonna drop 30 pounds in 30 days, and then you fail. But it's that consistency, it's that discipline every single day of just doing something that ultimately provides you that structure to the freedom that you're going to get long term. Because we're not looking for short-term gains here. This is a lifetime of changes that's going to lead you in that direction. So I appreciate everything that you have framed around that and what you're building too. So let's talk a little bit about you and where people can find more about you and your work and what you're doing on Substack.
Yeah, definitely. So I offer one-on-one coaching. I coach through a company called Spring Health, but then I also offer one-on-one sessions. I have a website, rachelcharbonneau.com, and I also have a Substack titled Subtle Shifts, but I think the actual URL is rachelcharbonneau.substack.com. And so that's been a really fun project for me personally, and then of course sharing with others, because a lot of the programs that I've worked on so far have been not as accessible to the general public. So it's been really fun for me to be able to share some of what I have been working on for so long, and the knowledge that I've gained. So that Substack specifically titled Subtle Shifts, is my intention behind it is to take more complex behavior change theory and applied behavior science, and take it and break it down for the more general public, and offer self-paced coaching exercises, because I do believe in accessibility, and if you want to, you can head to the Substack and actually start to implement some of the exercises that I would maybe share or teach, depending on how a session went with others. So that's been really fun. Definitely go follow along there. And then of course you can book one-on-one sessions with me as well.
Sure. No, that's great. And I have to say, I mean, I did sign up for your Substack, so I do get the newsletter. I love it.
Yeah,
It's well done,
Thank you.
well written, everything. Obviously, I know you, and I know your history and your knowledge and everything. It's so great that you're conveying that in a bite-size, easily consumable platform. So congrats on all of that.
Thank you.
With as we close out here, in talking, what's one thing that you would want, and I'm going to ask specifically for AFib, but this could be for anybody. What's one thing you would want every AFib patient listening to this conversation today to walk away with?
To walk away with, to think about your why. I'm a broken record here, but to think about your why, what you really care about, and how you can, whether you're just a few months post-diagnosis or a few years post-diagnosis, it is that big lifestyle change, and it's a mental, I'm using my hands like this because it's a mental change. in your identity. It's an identity shift in a lot of ways. I can imagine. I'm not an AFib patient, but I did read your book, so I could see that happening. Even just from performance, like, oh, okay, my performance just needs to shift and look different. So coming back to defining your values and how can you connect to some of those values that you have in a more creative way that you've maybe been feeling disconnected from since diagnosis, or not even diagnosis, since starting to feel symptoms.
Yeah, no, that's great.
One big takeaway that, again, I'm a broken record here, but it's a really important one.
Well, you have to hear things probably 8 to 10 times before they start to sink in. So I appreciate the repetition without question. So that is great. And I want to thank you for your time today. And hopefully let's continue this conversation as we move forward, and your knowledge and skills continue to embrace new things that are happening in the world to us. Let's keep this conversation going. But so we'll start to wrap up. And so thank you, Rachel. And until next time, let's live fully, lead boldly, and never stop writing your own story, because your heart has more to say. So keep listening to what we are sharing with you on our platform, because this is the AFibulous Life. So till next time, thank you, Rachel. Thank you, everybody out there in the world, and we'll talk to you soon.